This week on Dig Me Out.
If the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson were to be a 90s alt band, this would be it.
Tim and Jay review Frankfurt Telephonics by Mars Accelerator.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Dig Me Out. I'm your host, Tim Minichi, and joining me as always, my co-host, Mr. Jason Ziak. Jay, it is episode 172. We're on season 4, and believe it or not, we have another requested review.
Requested review.
Shocker.
I know. We've had a lot this year. A lot of people want us to check out records. And in many cases, they are ones that we have not heard of. And in this case, I was not familiar with the band. They're called Mars Accelerator. Jay, did you ever listen to Mars Accelerator back in the day?
I listened to Mars Electric.
Well,
maybe we'll do an episode on that band.
Maybe.
The name is familiar. I don't know if it's because of that other band or not, but no, I never actually listened to it.
I've listened to Mouse on Mars, which is a electronic band. Not this band, not Mars Accelerator. It was suggested to us by Mr. David Mayfield. He said we should check out the album Frankfurt Telephonics. And there's a parentheses in there with some more stuff, but I'm just going with Frankfurt Telephonics as the abbreviation for this album. So Jay, you were not familiar. I was not familiar. I think this would be an opportune time for us to talk about the history of the band and get into where exactly this band is from and what they're all about.
History of the band.
Quick quiz, Jay. Where do you think this band is from?
Country or city?
Anything. Country will determine the city, right? Or city will determine the country.
Yeah. Wow. Good question. I was either going to say Northeast or like North Carolina. So either like Connecticut or North Carolina.
So Connecticut or North Carolina. Now, what is your reasoning for that? Is the North Carolina because of... Yeah, go ahead.
Like the angular guitar stuff.
All right. Well, you're wrong on both accounts.
Thanks.
So, Mars
Thanks for belaboring that point.
Sure, no problem. Sometimes you're real close.
Yeah.
This time you were not. This band formed in Seattle, Washington.
Oh, okay.
In 1995 by vocalist and guitarist Bobby Nath, guitarist Mark LeBlanc, drummer Casey Bonham, and bassist Victoria Sloan. They released their first album a year later, I Am the South Pole, on the indie label RX Remedy, and 2 years later released their second album, the one that we're reviewing, Frankfurt Telephonics, also on RX Remedy. After the release of that album, drummer Bonham and bassist Sloan left the group. Nath and LeBlanc carried on, adding additional new members, Mary Genova on bass and vocals, and Justin Tomsovic on drums and percussion. They also added a third guitar player in John Dillon, who played guitar, keys, and then various miscellaneous instruments, as well as some backing vocals. It would be 11 years before they released their third album, Clouds for Your Y-Axis. They released this as a free download on their website. However, as of the recording of this podcast, their website is no longer active, so you cannot download that album anymore. You can find it on websites such as CD Baby if you were interested, but you cannot download it for free anymore. So that is the very brief history of Mars Accelerator. If you want to suggest an album for us to review, please visit our request review page at digmeoutpodcast.com. So Jay, Dave Mayfield was the one who suggested that we check out this band, and he also provided us some Facebook feedback for this record. He said, I stumbled on this band after moving to Seattle in 1997. Caught them at a show with Reservoir, which was a spin-off of the band Space Needle, which we reviewed last year. Heard the song, I'm going to say it as 10 hours and 40 minutes, but it's 1040M. I think that's 10 hours and 40 minutes. Not sure. Heard the song 10 hours and 40 minutes live and was hooked by the spacey slide guitar. If you like strange riffs a la Polvo and sciencey lyrics a la Hum, this is a great album. It is fairly dense, so need a few listens to get into it. My favorites are 1040, Zeros and Ones, and Mezzanine Faction. If the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson were to be a 90s alt band, this would be it. That's my favorite line from his notes on this record. They released another album, Free Online, in 2009, which we mentioned earlier, which is also great. Check out their Facebook page. Enjoy and thanks. P.S. Skip to the minute 7:45 on the last track for a couple short songs. We'll get into what that means a little bit later. So I want to provide one piece of information about this record. The producer of this record, Frankfurt Telephonics, is Mr. Steve Fisk. Jay, does that name ring a bell?
It does. Pigeon Head.
Yes, the man who is the second half of Pigeon Head with Sean Smith. He's also Washington-based, I guess say engineer, producer, and musician. He's worked with a lot of bands like the Posies and Low, Soul Coughing, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, Boss Hog, Harvey Danger, and has released his own material on labels such as K Records and SST Records. So that is the info about Steve Fisk. Let's get into the record. Mars Accelerator.
Let's get physical.
Let's get physical. Let me hear your body talk, Jay. Specifically,
you
let's
don't
talk.
want to hear that.
Let's hear it talk about.
I had a big dinner.
Did you?
You might hear some talking.
Wow. All right. Let's go. What I liked, what I didn't like. This is a long record. A lot of long songs. 11 of them. Let's talk about what we liked. Last episode, we did what I liked, what I didn't like, and I started. So I'm going to throw the floor open to you, Jay. Tell me, Jay, one thing that you liked about Frankfurt Telephonics by Mars Accelerator. Damn it, you put Mars Electric in my head.
See?
Mars Accelerator.
30 Seconds to Mars?
30 Seconds to Mars.
Or Mars Volta?
I didn't realize how many Mars bands there are.
I know.
It's creeping up on super and sugar territory.
And then there's just Mars with 2 R's and periods between each.
It's getting kind of hectic, Jay.
I know. Well, it's hard to ignore the guitars, right? I mean, they are very layered, very different, extremely creative. You know, that lots of different tones, lots of different effects. You've got riffs, you got leads, you got accents, you have noise. There's a lot here to take in from a guitar standpoint. So, as somebody who loves guitar and appreciates, creative and different kind of guitar playing, this album's chock full of it. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and they do, like you said, a lot of different sounds and a lot of different effects. A lot of bands sort of tried to go with a little bit more of a stripped down, I don't want to say stripped down in like a garage sense, but you didn't get a lot of effects in, say, a Pearl Jam record in the 90s or an Alice in Chains. You know, you might have some like wah or some delay, something like that, but
sure.
There are all sorts of things going on this record. And I think the thing that stood out for me, the first time I listened to this record, it was like a punch in the face because this is a dense record. But as I sort of digested it more and more, I think one of the things I appreciated, besides the guitar playing, which is all over the place, is how this record builds, because the first song is really, really off-putting. I mean, it's like this skeleton of a song. It's called Spites Are Looming. And it's very jagged and broken. And I was listening to this and I was like, what is this record going to be? This is like the antithesis of the last record we did, which was Sugar Plastic, which was this sort of take on power pop, and this is going the complete opposite direction. And sometimes it's nice to take a complete, 180-degree turn from one album to the next.
Swear on low, and you might mention, but ought to not do. Vain like bells, we are clapping, pay no attention. CC Echelon Queens, to grok the thought and deal with sin.
As this record builds, I think around songs 4 and 5, when you get into like Jupiter Fell into a Lapse, that's when I started to hear like the Built to Spill and pop sensibility, which saying pop sensibility on this record is a pretty dangerous thing, because they're not going for like traditional pop hooks, but they're putting some really interesting melodies in. And that's the first song where I was like, oh, okay, they really have a grasp of like this sort of twisted pop that like Built to Spill or the Modest, especially early Modest Mouse, or even bands like Mercury Rev or Flaming Lips, like they would be doing. And it continues on from there into Captains, the Spies, and all the way up to Zeros and Ones is another standout track for me. So I really liked how the album got progressively more and more interesting and more, I don't want to say poppy, but just a little bit more. And maybe it's because I was sort of understanding what they were doing more, but it gets a little bit more digestible as you move through the record, to the point where like it almost becomes, like a latter day or later 90s Built to Spill record, where you kind of hear these melodies that are a bit odd, but they creep up on you, and you're like, you can kind of start to remember things after a couple listens.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think Zeros and Ones is a great example of that. In fact, it's probably my favorite song on the record, and it does push their notion of commercial or pop sensibilities, to the limit for them. It also includes something that's interesting. It has what I believe is a drum machine, or at least augmented drums, which normally I would, if I had to come one way or the other, in most cases I would say, I'd prefer a live drummer. But in this case, it kind of helps this band quite a bit. I'm not quite sure if it's a case of it just being refreshing at that point in the album to hear something different, or if it's, just a really good juxtaposition in terms of rhythm and what they do with guitar. that song works particularly well, but it falls into the same situation with most of this record. When you start to talk about, Later Date, Built to Spill, and some of the other comparisons you made. I think most of the songs are good for the first couple minutes. It's the remaining 5
Yeah.
or 4 that leave me scratching my head. So, even a song like 1040M, which you brought up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I really love how that song sets up. It's got this really strange but very cool guitar, like a warbly kind of reverb guitar sound. It's very, I don't know. It's pretty, but it's kind of fragile and odd. And it's got some, they kind of juxtapose that with big chunkier chords and a driving bass. So there's some nice contrast going on there. With how they layer things. There's some nice shifts and turns.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden it becomes another song, like completely. Things cut out. They change chords. I think they go back to the intro, like chord structure, but they play it like in a not halftime, but just like a totally different tempo, like it's way slower.
Yeah.
But not in a clearly like they just cut the time. It's a different time signature altogether. And it goes on like that for like another, I don't know. It's like more than half the song. And by the end, it just devolves into sort of noise and nonsense. And I think that's a good example. That song is a good example of most of this record for me, is that those early opening minutes are very, very cool, especially when they pick up the tempo, because all the guitar, what's the right word? Say gymnastics that are going on there, the cuts and the interspersing of overdubs and different, angular parts and effects and everything. When you speed that up, that becomes even more interesting, because it's kind of like it keeps your brain active, in the music. But it is, and so when the tempo's up, that makes even more compelling for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I almost feel like, this would have benefited from them chopping up the songs and making them separate tracks, and almost making like with a Rush song where you'd have, part 1, part 2, part 3, and you would split them into like separate, 2-minute long tracks. I kind of feel like in a lot of instances where they do kind of go off on a bizarre tangent that has nothing to do with where the song started, that in 1040M is a perfect example. It would have really helped if that song had been cut up, because that, like you mentioned, that like first 2 minutes of the song is this like this really interesting guitar line over an up-tempo beat, and then it just devolves into this chaotic mess, which is not necessarily bad. I think that that's one of the things that works for me, is like on a whole, listening to this as a piece of music, this entire record works for me. But when I start breaking down the parts, like the way that it's sequenced and the way that it's, with the way that each of the songs are compiled, that's what sort of falls apart for me. And I really like the overall, but not the bits and pieces when you separate them, which is not, that's something that's happened before, where we listen to an album and go, oh, this is a cool album, but when they start to dissect it, that's where the trouble starts.
Yeah, it's I found it to be good music to have on when I was working and sort of doing other things, and not because it's easy to ignore, but because it's so creative, and it kind of like, I felt like it's kind of brain food almost, with all the stuff that's going on. And there's enough, it's distant enough that you can kind of zone out a little bit, but it's still kind of like, I don't know, perks your interest here and there mentally. And there's a lot of cool ideas. From a pop standpoint, one of the things that's tough about it is that, especially towards the end of the record, things just become so fleeting. Like the melodies that are there, they kind of show themselves, but they move on so quick. You know what I mean? There's like these little blips and bursts of things you want to grab onto, and then it's just gone, and then they don't reprise it and they move on to something. They're just constantly moving on to the next thing. I think after like serious repeated listens, all of that would start to gel together, but it's a difficult record. There's no doubt about that, to really feel like you've absorbed it and kind of get where they're going with it.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it reminds me of a band that you were probably referencing at the beginning with your North Carolina comment, and it's Polvo. Very similar in the sense that, the melodies are not apparent the first time you're listening to it in terms of like a pop melody, but there are these weird twisted things going on that catch your ear and sort of become familiar after a listener or two. And same thing with like a band like, I think an obvious influence on this band is like Sonic Youth, in terms of these bizarre sort of guitar adventures that they go on. But I don't think that, Polvo is successful to me because underneath it all, they are able to construct these interesting songs where if the vocal melody isn't necessarily the main melody, they're able to find something going on in the guitars or in the bass that really hook you in as far as the melodies go. And sometimes it's even by using sort of non-traditional Western, scales. They might use like an Eastern scale or something like that and really, go off the beaten path. Whereas with this album, I didn't necessarily feel like the guitars or any other instrument was picking up the melody slack, which is really, when it comes down to it, I don't want to listen to somebody just play 4 chords or 8 chords or 12 chords. I need to hear something on top of that. And that was missing at some points.
Yeah, you also don't want to listen to somebody play a random what's a seemingly random arrangement of 24 notes.
Right.
At times I feel like a little bit like that on this record. What band that came to mind that, I don't know, you might think I'm a little bit nutty here, but especially on a song like Mezzanine Faction, it reminded me of like Shudder to Think without the really razor sharp precision musicianship. Like that band, you think about like the weird notes and chord structures and song structures they used, was not that dissimilar to the approach that this band's taking. The main difference is, I think, the presentation of that idea. So their presentation is way more lo-fi and ragged and looser, and it seems like a lot of the stuff that's going on here is maybe even a little bit accidental. Happened in the studio, they captured it, they move on. Whereas with Shudder to Think, you're like, okay, these guys, like, this is insane music, but what makes it even more insane is that they've planned out every single note and moment of this and rehearsed it 5,000 times. And when they play it live, I guarantee it sounds exactly like this.
Right.
I don't get that sense from this band, in terms of that part of the presentation. In fact, I even wondered how this band pulled this off live, and if they did pull it off live or if it was some other interpretation of it, because there's just so many, like, what seems like guitar overdubs and layered on top of each other, and just strange effects, and just, it's really cool from a record standpoint because they capture some really interesting sounds through that. But in terms of a live band, and the comparison to Shudder to Think, I just wonder if, how much of this was studio magic and how much of it is, actual determined songwriting and, scripted.
Based on listening to this band and what you just mentioned, my guess is that this was not a band that sounded exactly like their record live, that they probably went off on longer, jammier tangents. And I can see them taking a song that's like 6 or 7 minutes long here and turning that into like a 10 or 11 minute long jam with a lot more noise, an extended, guitar, freak out involved. It reminded me of, you had a guitar pedal. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Was it the frequency something?
Oh, the frequency analyzer.
That's it.
Yeah.
That you could never reproduce really the same notes twice. Like, you could kind of get in the ballpark, but you could never really get back to exactly what you did the first time, because it was almost like a theremin for your guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of imagine that band is sort of like the embodiment of that instrument or of that pedal.
Right. Yeah, because it's creating octave notes using a dial. So you're like, and you've got 3 dials. So to get the exact octave notes that you want, again, requires you to, play the same note, remember the 3 in the 3 knob combination, which is without any clicks. You know what I mean? Like, so you've done like 6. Difference between 6 and 6.5 is a different note.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so you could never get back there. And I feel like this band there's moments like that happen, and to get back there, I don't think you could. So I'm not quite sure what they did live, but at the end of the day, I guess that doesn't matter in terms of the record. I think what they did capture, they captured some really cool sounds. It's just not sure if they captured some really cool songs.
And that's really always the knock on what would be called math rock, which is sort of the nerdier subgenre of, I don't know, post-hardcore. Is that the right sort of direction?
I don't know. I guess. I've always wondered what that... I mean, I've heard the term and I've heard bands described as that, and I've listened to some of those bands, but I never quite understood.
I've always thought of it as bands that like take real pleasure and really get into like odd time signatures, doing very calculated structures in songs so that they mathematically like work out in certain ways, like setting things up so that they have like a 2 verses and then a 2 chorus and then a 2 bar chorus and then a 4 bar verse and a 4 bar chorus and a 6, and like doing like these weird mathematical structures to their songs, and playing in 7/8 and 5/4 seamlessly bouncing between those time signatures, and then going to 4/4 with the drummer playing. You could have the band playing in 4/4, but the drummer playing a 3/4, and then adding an extra beat. It just those sorts of like oddball things that like some bands might do it once. They might do an odd time signature here or there, but to me the math rock bands are the ones that are doing that on every song. They're incorporating it into every aspect of every song, whether it's the way that the drum and the bass match up with the way the guitars are playing or the vocals being sung or what have you. But that's the we're talking about whether they replicate this live or not. That's the element to me that's like very planned out and very discussed and ruminated on in terms of, you're not just going to play 4/4. You're not going to play 1-2-3-4, 1-2-3-4 on every song. Every song is going to be a challenge in that sense. And that to me is like the math rock genre in a very long and sort of circular explanation.
But math rock is isn't it like super precise and like repeatable? Isn't that part of it? Like it's like prog, right? I mean, but a more, I guess, contemporary take on prog. No?
Well, I think progressive rock can become grandiose, and I think of math rock as being more grounded in like a shoegaze, having a shoegaze element to it,
right?
Because they embrace like the noise of like feedback and distortion more so than like a progressive rock band, which I think of as being a more like studio precise sort of sound.
Yeah. So there's aspects of math rock that aren't necessarily repeatable, or that's not a huge concern. You'll do some stuff in the studio, maybe not be able to pull it off live, or
sure.
Really, okay.
That's my interpretation. That people out there who are listening to this might disagree, but that's how I sort of look at it. So let's talk about our overalls on Mars Accelerator. How would we rate this record, whether it be a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single? Usually I throw this to you, Jay, but I'm going to start this one so that you can do a little change up here.
Do it, you bum.
So I'm going to two-tier this. I think this is a worthy album as a like sort of a cohesive listening experience. But if I have to pick songs, I think it's an EP for me. I think there's like 5 or 6 songs that I think are really interesting and cool, but I don't know that there's necessarily like a singular entry point to go to someone and say, hey, you need to check out Mars Accelerator. Check out the song Zeros and Ones. Like, that would be, this is hard. Like, I feel like you need to sit down and listen to this record and just chill out and put on a pair of headphones and turn it up loud and sort of let it flow over you. And then you'll figure out whether you like this record. Because, I mean, right off the bat, that first track is so jarring to most people, probably, that you're going to know. And I would say to people, hold on. It's going to get a little bit, easier to digest as you move through it. But the first half of the record is a little more experimental than the back half of the record. Although, I mean, there's obviously these experiments going on throughout the entire record. It's like a goddamn high school chemistry class. But I think this is a record where if you get past the first couple songs and you're like interested, it's going to be something that you're going to really like. Whereas if you hear the first song and you're like, oh dear God, what the hell is this? Just turn it off and go away. So as an overall album, I think it's worthy. But if I'm going to pick songs from it, I'm at like 4 songs. So it's an EP.
Oh, so you're an EP?
I'm at an EP for...
Jeez. You just basically talked about why it was such a great album, and then you're like, yeah, it's an EP.
Well, I'm saying like there are probably, 5 or 6 songs that I think that are fine, but they're not worthy. I think they need editing. Okay. They need, that sort of thing. So
gotcha. Okay.
That's where I'm at.
I'm I think with you. It's not a matter of like, tell me if you agree with this point. It's not a matter of like picking and choosing songs to get to the EP, as much as it is. I can't give it a full album rating because I think in the majority of the cases, I'm looking at the songs here, I would say 9 out of 11 songs. If you need to lop the second half of the song off. So I can't say it's a worthy album when I'm saying every song should basically get cut in half.
Right.
So with that in mind, that's where I'm coming to the EP rating in sort of an unconventional way. I think it's like half an album, of good stuff. You can do that. You can cut and slice and dice that, or cut that up in any way you choose. But I wouldn't be able to say it's a good complete album.
There you go, folks. We both agree that there are elements that we like about this record, but needs some editing and has a few songs that we both enjoyed. So check out Mars Accelerator. Unfortunately, their website is down, but they do have a Facebook page. Has not been updated since 2010, but you can go check out stuff on there. And they have a MySpace page for people from 2005. If you want to go check that out. And you can search the web and locate music from this band. I think the entire 2009 album is on YouTube. They put each song up on YouTube, so you can actually listen to it that way. If you so, they're not videos necessarily that accompany them. It's just the album cover, but you can check them all out. So, if you like what you heard, please consider leaving us some positive feedback over on our iTunes page. I want to thank everyone for checking us out, whether it be on iTunes or Radio.io or Stitcher or however you receive this transmission. We greatly appreciate it. Of course, head on over to digmeoutpodcast.com for our request a review page as well as our daily updates. For Jay, I'm Tim. That's another one in the books. We'll be back next week with another episode. Dig me out.
Join the conversation about this episode at digmeoutpodcast.com, where you can find links to our Facebook page and Twitter feed, as well as links to our request a review and merchandise pages.